Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 minutes before 8 is the time. Just making contact with Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, and while we establish that, let's talk about the idea that they should all be back at work as of Monday. Ahmed in New Malden, thank you for hanging on. Your view?
Good morning, Nick.
Hello, sir.
Yes, this government's politicians have been on holidays for the last 2.5 years. They're having a laugh at our expense. Do they know what hardship all the people, all the average families are going through? They couldn't care less. It's free for all.
How do you know?
Companies.
How do you know they couldn't care less? What makes you say that?
They have not taken any action on these companies. Not only oil, gas. Everybody's on a bandwagon, and they are making these. I would say, or how should I say, gross profits. It's not question of...
Are you talking about P&O here? Is that what's annoyed you?
Not just P&O. All the oil, gas companies and all the other businesses, they're on the bandwagon. They're just making profits like anything. And this government, because of lack of action, we are paying for their sins and lack of action. For 2.5 years, they have not done anything to control these companies.
Lastly, would you, if you are that condemning of them, surely you wouldn't want them back in power. You'd want them gone, wouldn't you?
Well, of course, it will serve no purpose. They haven't done anything. They're not going to do anything. They are not, these companies. How come they are making these huge profits? Well,
in some instances, and it sticks in my craw to say it's because they're sacking nearly 800 seafarers, and that helps then shore up their profits. Which is not acceptable to many. Ahmed, thank you. Mike and Crawley, the only politician I think of who deserves a holiday, but I know won't take one, is President Zelensky of the Ukraine. If you look at history, great events, revolutions and similar can be triggered by a specific event, but they follow a long period of perceptions that something is not right. In the UK, there is, by general consent, a feeling that something has gone wrong, and the continuing apparent government absence is fueling that belief. Statements from politicians about future plans, support, actions might just as well be promises of free beer tomorrow. Personally, I don't think the government is rudderless. It's more like the tiller post has been privatised and the captain can do nothing about it. I always enjoy reading Mike's emails, and that was probably rather frighteningly accurate, actually. Anne in Preston, if you really want Mr Johnson back, surely not a man who fraternises with the Russians, is not trusted by the EU or the Americans. I didn't know that. I thought they were rather close. It doesn't matter because the public needs someone who will tell them what is really going on. I am exasperated by everything that is happening around me. Pete in Tring, get Boris back. He's the worst of a pitiful bunch. Liz Truss promises to legislate to remove union powers. This would negatively affect all of us in the future. This cannot be allowed to happen. If you want someone with vision, why doesn't Mick Lynch, I remind you, of course, he is the relevant trade union boss, why doesn't he set up a party? I would vote for him in a heartbeat. It does appear he's getting a lot of support, even though, of course, as we're hearing from our travel desk, there is considerable disruption with the trains. And in London, of course, you add to that with an underground and a bus strike. That's all to do with transport, which leads us neatly in to the idea that we could be seeing self-driving vehicles or driverless cars running on motorways by 2025, thanks to new government plans. Drivers will still need a licence, so you can get on the roads. Here with more details, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps. How confident are you that you will hit that deadline, and why are you bringing it forward? Good morning.
Morning. I look at the world obviously moves on and there's new technologies come about. We want to make sure that Britain is at the leading edge of all of this, but we also want to make sure it's absolutely safe and that we've got things like, responsibilities where they lie worked out. So, yes, I'm confident a lot of work's been done on this. The Law Commission have worked on this for years, looking at how best to apportion blame if something does go wrong. Technical side of things will rely on whether the car companies come forward with vehicles which are capable of all of this. So, it looks very positive. It's a great announcement this morning, £100 million going into all of this. It should lead to safer roads, but that's the number one concern, to make sure it does.
How would you respond to the comment that this is driverless cars from a rudderless government, Mr. Shapps?
A cheap hit, I would say. Look, there's something.
But where is the boss?
For many years.
Who's at the wheel? I know we clearly have a government that doesn't have a driver as well.
I see we're going to extend the metaphor. Well,
we are.
what I would say is, this is probably actually a very good example. Here is a policy that we've worked on for many years. The Law Commission's been working on it. We've been working on, and it comes to fruition today. It's a good example of how the government is, in fact, getting on with the job. I have made sure that I've been around the entire summer. I haven't been anywhere at all, looking after the transport system, hoping to ensure that people get away as smoothly as possible after what we know has been a very difficult restart for our aviation sector, for our airports. And by and large, that has worked this summer. So, that's a good example of, I think, those of us at our best doing our jobs.
Do you think that people who've endured the hell that is Heathrow Airport would agree that it's worked rather well this summer, Mr. Shapps?
I think it depends on individual flights. I get plenty of people telling me that they breezed through expecting to see it being very bad. Clearly, there are still longer lines and queues in many cases than there were pre the pandemic. But what we haven't seen this summer are the sort of scenes that we saw in the spring and during the half-term, the Whitsun half-term, where we saw those very, very severe delays. We haven't seen that at the airports this summer.
All right, so we're talking about a promise to have driverless cars backed by £100 million on roads. Can I take you back to some previous promises that you and I have talked about? I take you back to March at the height of the so-called P&O scandal, and you told me this.
Brazen, breathtaking, arrogance. We will not allow the situation to rest where it is. It's disgraceful, and I'm going to bring forward a package of measures this week to Parliament which will force them to U-turn.
Your anger was justified. That company had just fired 786 seafarers, and today we hear they've made record-breaking profits of around £600 million, $800 plus million. What action did you take?
Yeah, well, it's not that company. It's their
Dubai-based,
made the
DP
money.
World. DP World.
So I was thinking the money's probably been made in other areas. But my comments from back in March absolutely stand. Since then, I brought forward to Parliament a 9-point plan, which included a change to the law, a primary legislation, as it's called. So it's a major change to the law. We've now put that change through. It will come into action later this year. It will indeed force P&O to U-turn on the very, very key point, which is they will not be able to employ people below the minimum wage and regularly supply their trade between, say, here and France in our waters. So that change is coming about. I can report, actually, that every single one of those seafarers, I understand, have now, in fact, gone on to other jobs, usually better paid than what P&O were offering. So I'm not sure the same workers will wish to go back to P&O, given the way they were treated. And the action over the chief executive of P&O, who acted in that way, Peter Hebblethwaite, remains outstanding. It's with the Insolvency Service, who are looking into both civil and criminal action in this particular case.
When Frances O'Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC, says there are laws still in place that would allow agency workers to be deployed in this fashion again, and you, the government, have nothing about them, is she right?
I'm not quite sure why she's saying that or in what way she's saying it. The key point here is that P&O, remember, went out of their way to break the law. They admitted that they'd done that to a select committee in Parliament and said that they would do it again. The law that we're changing would prevent that from happening. So, no, I don't think that's correct.
All right. You also talked in the papers yesterday, you were featured in the papers yesterday, with a plan to tackle the rail strikers. I remember you telling me you were going to do this in June. You wrote a powerful piece in the Daily Telegraph last week. You've written a powerful piece in the Daily Mail yesterday. Very strong on words, short on action, Transport Secretary.
Well, these changes take time, but this is a 16-point plan that you're referring to that I wrote about yesterday. You'll be pleased to know we've already changed the law on 2 of those items.
What have you done since June?
Since June specifically, changed those 2 laws, one of which allows for people to cover for other people within the rail sector, indeed within the wider economy. So we've already started to act. Of course, it will be for the next PM, for the next Prime Minister, to decide how to take these measures forward. But I think many of them are long, long overdue. People
why haven't you done them? You've been in post for years, never mind the new PM.
Well, in fairness, what we haven't had is the railways out on strike, not least because you, me, and every one of your listeners, every household, has been paying £600 to keep them in their jobs over the coronavirus. So I've got to be completely blunt with you. Our first priority wasn't changing union legislation when we were fighting the world's greatest pandemic, and it's as simple as that.
Point 6 of your 16-point plan, Secretary of State, prohibit use of inflammatory language on pickets. Does that mean use by pickets or people insulting pickets? What do we mean?
Yeah, so I actually heard you comment on this yesterday in the programme, I think.
Yes, you're prohibiting freedom of speech.
Yes, and you said surely there are laws in place, and that's right. And
you're always welcome to call me Mr. Shapps. We can have Grant from Hertfordshire whenever you like, sir.
Well, I knew I was coming on today, or likely to, so I thought we would catch up now instead.
Yeah, you're prohibiting free speech, Secretary of State.
No, what this is about actually is preventing people who do perhaps want to go to work, and after all, that is their free right. That is their freedom from being abused as they do so. Now, there are 2 laws in place that prevent intimidate. But the situation is neither of them quite capture this in a way which can often be prosecuted. So they sort of get away with it, and that isn't right. People should have the right and the freedom to work if that's what they want to do.
Okay. What final question, and I will let you go. As you're such a keen listener, you'll know we discussed the idea from the government of cyclists having to have insurance and licence plates. And again, I think this is something that you're in support. But your own department in November 2018 says the government has no plans to introduce a registration or licensing regime for cyclists. So which is it, Secretary of State?
No plans to introduce registration plates. The wider point that I was making, though, is that it's got to be right to ensure that everybody who uses our roads does so responsibly. What I was actually talking about at the time were cyclists who perhaps bust through red lights. We see that an awful lot. There is no a way to prosecute a driver who might run into somebody else, and sometimes we get these very sad cases of death by dangerous cycling, and we're proposing to bring in death by dangerous cycling as a specific offence, along with other changes car drivers and for other users of the road as well. So this is not a plan which is, as I think has been suggested, somehow going after cyclists. No government, I think no Secretary of State has done more to prioritise cycling, and I'm proud that we've got cycling at record numbers. Indeed, I'm a cyclist, so we're not going to have registration plates and the like. I think the question is then asked: well, if you're going to stop people going through red lights, how do you know who it was, etc. The point is, as I said, when the law tries to catch up with incidents involving cyclists, the law itself is not sufficient at the moment. So you end up with relying on horse and coach legislation to prosecute cyclists. That, of course, makes no sense.
OK, driverless cars. Would you take your family in a driverless car on a smart motorway, Mr. Shapps?
If the driverless car has been properly signed off and it's at all the correct levels of automation, there are none available that do that at the moment, to be clear. And if it's shown to be safe, then yes, of course I would, because we know from, for example, autopilots that fly aircraft that no one thinks I shouldn't be on this, 767 or Airbus because it might be flying on autopilot. And the same one day will be the case on the roads. And this plan that we're publishing today, and £100 million, takes us one step closer to automated travel.
Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, thank you for your time. Always feel free to ring in. We'll put you not to the top of the queue, but you'll take your place, and I'd enjoy speaking with you. Thank you for your time. 3 after 8, news on LBC next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation.